There's a town in northwest New Jersey, a place where streetlights don't exist, and the roads wind endlessly through thick woods, with not a gas station in sight for miles. The only places to stop are bars filled with people who have stories they shouldn't tell. I don't live there, but I had a friend who did. He heard one such story from someone at one of those bars, and because of that, he dragged me and a few others into the woods. We were just high school kids at the time. In this town, bartenders never checked IDs. Too few people traveled those roads for the bars to turn anyone away. So my friend, let's call him Michael, had no trouble ordering drinks. Probably some cheap, watered-down beer. He struck up a conversation with a stranger. Michael described the guy as mostly normal, except for the deep scar that carved from his jaw to his collarbone, like a wicked memory etched into his flesh. After a few drinks, the man started bragging, said he'd lived in the town his whole life. He claimed he had some stories, especially about hunting deep in the woods. Mostly he hunted squirrels with a bow and arrow, but sometimes he'd take down deer right through the skull, bring them home to skin and eat. One day though, he ventured into a part of the woods he rarely went, a stretch of road I won't name. The road snaked for 5 miles through the densest part of the forest, where the trees seemed to choke out the sky. The man drove halfway through, parked, and wandered in, hoping to hunt. But as he walked, something felt wrong. He told Michael he must have trekked 4 miles in, but he didn't see a single deer. Not even a squirrel, no birds sang, no rustling of leaves. Just a thick, oppressive silence hanging over everything. Even the wind seemed afraid to stir the branches. He was about to turn back when he spotted something through the trees, a stone tower, crumbling with age. Around here, plenty of buildings get abandoned. Crackheads sometimes make dens out of them, but this tower, something was off. The earth around it was scorched and barren, as if nature had decided to abandon this place. No grass, no moss, not even weeds. The soil looked dead, like it had been blasted by something that left it cursed. The man, naturally curious, went inside. Who wouldn't, right? A castle in the middle of the woods. It practically begs you to explore. He poked around in the rubble, but found nothing of value. He was ready to leave when he heard it, a soft scraping sound, like claws against stone. He said it sounded like a dog scratching at a door. Intrigued, he followed the sound down a narrow stairway that led to a basement, the scraping and whining growing louder with each step. At the bottom, the noise became something worse, a heart-wrenching whimper, the kind a dog makes when it's starving, desperate. But no matter how hard he looked, there was no dog. There wasn't even a door, just cold stone walls. But that sound kept coming, clawing at his nerves. The man started to leave, his foot hitting the first step when the whimpering morphed into a sharp, savage bark. Another, then another, each one louder, angrier, more twisted than the last. The barking came from beyond the far wall, but there was no way to reach it. No door, no passage, nothing. The man ran, his heart pounding, leaving whatever was on the other side to its fate. He never found out what was behind that wall. But he was certain of one thing, whatever it wasn't a dog. And it wasn't meant to be found. I don't know what that thing was, but it sounded strong, like a dog maybe, but different. I thought maybe someone walled up a dog down there, but the stones, they looked ancient. If a dog could still bark with that much force, those walls would have had to be freshly built, right? But those stones, they looked like they'd been there for centuries. That wasn't the strangest part though. On his way back to the car, something changed. For the first time since entering the forest, he heard something alive, a low, guttural growl, deep enough to rattle your bones. He told Michael he turned around, and standing at the edge of the trees was a massive wolf. Its fur was white, like a snowdrift given life, its eyes locked on him, head lowered, teeth bared. He said he'd seen all sorts of things in those woods, but never a wolf. Its fur was white, like a snowdrift given life, its eyes locked on him, head lowered, teeth bared. He said he'd seen all sorts of things in those woods, but never a wolf. As he hurried back to his car, he saw more of them, wolves, emerging from the shadows, circling him, glaring from the dark spaces between the trees. He did the only thing he could. He got into his car and floored it, tearing down that forgotten road, not daring to look back. Only after he'd left the woods behind did he notice something strange. He was bleeding. A gash ran across his arm. He didn't know when it happened. He hadn't felt a thing until he was far away from that place. By then, he needed stitches. But the pain? It didn't hit until he was out of those cursed woods. Michael told me and a few others that story one night. Naturally, we had to see it for ourselves. It sounded too cool to pass up. I mean, wolves? I love wolves. I've got a Siberian husky at home, Dante. So just in case we ran into something, I brought a combat knife. One of my friends, less subtle, brought a pistol. None of us were old enough to carry those weapons, but around here, the law didn't mean much. We followed the old man's directions into the woods. At first, it was just trees, rocks, tangled roots. No animals, no birds, no squirrels, nothing. It felt wrong. Bizarre, even. Without the sounds of life, you start to notice other things. The way the roots twisted and coiled, it reminded me of worms burrowing through rotting flesh. The trees, thick with pine needles, blocked out the sun. Even though it was noon, it felt like twilight, like the light couldn't quite reach us. Eventually, we found the castle, just like the man said. We almost walked right past it, but Michael turned around at just the right moment. It wasn't much of a castle, though. More like a stone hut, really. There weren't enough bricks left to suggest it was ever taller than 2 stories. Probably some old settler's cabin, I thought, trying to make sense of it. But Michael, he wasn't buying it. He didn't want to believe it was just some old house. A castle sounded way cooler. We kicked around the rubble for a while. One of my friends brought a spray can and tried tagging the walls, but weirdly, the paint wouldn't come out. The nozzle wasn't clogged or anything, it just wouldn't spray. Then, I heard it, the scratching. Faint at first, like claws scraping against stone. There's no way something's still alive down there, I muttered as we made our way down a narrow stairway into the basement. Flashlights sweeping across barren, cold walls. But it wasn't just scratching we heard. There was a cry too, this pitiful, heart-wrenching whine. It sounded like Dante when someone accidentally steps on his paw, but worse. Something twisted in my gut as I searched for a door, some opening to whatever was making that noise. But no matter how hard we looked, there was nothing. Just like the old man said, no door, no way in. But Michael had come prepared for that. He brought a sledgehammer. It took several swings to break through the wall. At first, the stones crumbled easily, but soon his strength started to fade. What once took 1 swing now took 4, but eventually, the wall gave way. We stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the thick darkness. I didn't know what to expect, maybe a wolf, a dog, or even some ghostly creature. What I didn't expect was an empty room with a single rock sitting in the middle. The rock had a ribbon tied around it, a thin fabric, almost like hemp. We all tried to cut it with our knives, but the blades came out scratched and dull. Whoever tied it hadn't wanted it undone. And the walls, they were covered in strange runes. It looked like something ancient old German maybe, like the kind of writing you'd find in a Viking saga. I'd studied Beowulf in class, and this looked eerily similar. But these runes? They were written from the inside of the room. Whoever carved them had been trapped in here. That meant 2 things. Either they died in this room, or there was another way out. We searched everywhere, running our hands along the floor, the walls, looking for any trapdoor or secret exit. But there was nothing, except for the hand. It was human. Torn off clean at the wrist, lying there under a layer of dust. It hadn't rotted, hadn't decayed. The maggots hadn't touched it. And it wasn't just lying there, it had been bitten off. Whatever had done it was no scavenger. The rooms and the ghost dog didn't scare us, but that hand, that terrified us. We didn't waste any more time. We left. No wolves followed us through the trees, but when we reached the car, we heard it. A howl. Deep and furious, echoing from the woods behind us. None of us spoke a word on the drive home. Michael, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but no one laughed. He even talked about going back to check out the hand again. But I knew he was trying to hide how shaken he was. I guess he did try to go back. That's when they found his body. The police said they found his car pulled over on that same road. His mom had reported him missing. He was inside, doors locked, crashed into a tree. At first, people thought he'd been drinking, maybe crashed after a late night. I wish that were true. But it wasn't. Something had been in the car with him. The seats were shredded, clawed up beyond recognition. The steering wheel? Twisted, torn apart. And Michael. Something had ripped out his eyes. His throat was slashed open, his insides spilled across his lap, draped beneath the gas pedal. He had been dead long before the car ever hit that tree. The strangest part? There was no sign of an animal, no fur, no broken windows. No sign of anything getting in or out. It was like whatever did that to him had just appeared inside, torn him apart, and vanished. The only proof it had ever been, there were the marks of its claws, and the mess it left behind.